Here we are again, ladies and gentlemen. Max Forti, joined by my good friend Darish Alavi, aka Persolaise. If you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, you are missing out because it's quirky, it's fun, it's one of the best descriptive fragrance channels out there. Period. Go check it out if you haven't. The link's going to be below. As always, today the 1980s culture, music, fragrances. Let's get it on. So, welcome to the show. Welcome to another video.
Thank you very much, Max. Thanks for having me, and thanks for your kind words, as always.
I had a lot of coffee this morning, so I'm nice and perky. I had like double the amount of caffeine that I normally get. But let's get the show on the road. This was harder. I have to say, the 80s to me was a harder pick than the 70s. I mean, I grew up in the 80s as a kid, and I knew a lot of these fragrances, and to leave some of these out, I hope that we have a little time in the end to talk about some of the honorable mentions or ones that could have easily made this list. How was it for you? Was it harder to do as well?
Unquestionably harder than the 70s. And as we were just talking before we pressed record, I wonder if that is all to do with the fact that we became teenagers in the 80s, and so these are the smells of our parents, uncles, aunts, grandparents, the smells that were around, in the shops. Plus, there were lots and lots of really great perfumes. But I think it's just going to get harder and harder as we go through these series. I think the 90s are going to be hard. I think the following decade will be hard. It's not an easy thing we've set ourselves to do.
That's true. And did you, at this time around, do you think your picks are going to revolve more on the feminine side like last time, and I did most masculines, or you think it's a nice mix this time around?
Well, I don't mind telling you, I'm looking at the 5 now. Interestingly, there are 3 that were sold as and are still sold as masculines. So 3 masculines. It was a particularly good decade for men's perfumes, wasn't it?
100%. Incredible. I think, arguably, I would say it's the best decade of all time for masculine releases. I would easily say it. I mean, all major brands had incredible releases, as we'll see here, and we'll mention some of these. I mean, when it comes to like fougères, I think it was absolutely the best decade. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the culture, the music, what was going on in the 80s. Now, when we're talking about the 80s, guys, we're talking about, of course, the 9th decade of the 20th century. And it involves dates from January 1st of 1980 until December 31st, 1989. So we're going to have fragrances within those dates. So what were the 80s like, Darish? Tell us a little bit about the culture, the music, movies. Like, what was going on in your life or in general that you can remember?
The 80s were big, weren't they? I mean, I think the way that we currently remember the 80s is probably accurate. They were the decade of excess. They were the decades of, big hair, the shoulder pads thing. I mean, all of that is true. They were the decades of those huge, it was the decade rather. They were the years of those huge successful soap operas on TV, like Dallas, like you guys say Dynasty, over here we say Dynasty. Those epic series, and also big movies like Die Hard and Empire Strikes Back and RoboCop and Blade Runner. Epic scale, and I think that was reflected in the perfumes and in just the general excess that was around everywhere.
100%. I mean, Indiana Jones, Ghostbusters, Beverly Hills Cop. I mean, Eddie Murphy was huge in box office. I mean, E.T. the Extraterrestrial was like a huge hit here. Just incredible stuff music-wise. Madonna, Michael Jackson, Prince, Queen, George Michael. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, if you grew up in the 80s, you knew all this stuff was just huge and it was happening. Big hair, mullets, the beginning stages of mullets, mustache, big hair, perm. I remember like a lot of ladies with perms and big hair. It was just a lot of fun. Tons of makeup. It was a funny era. And towards the end, there was a lot of like a little bit of a confusion, I want to say, because you're coming off the disco and then everyone wants to really express themselves, like the new wave style of music and hairstyle with the gels and different colors. Punk was really huge at that point too. So it was a cool era. It was a great time to be alive. And I remember the Atari system, the entertainment system, like the video game, which was my first video game ever. I remember one of my
Atari 2600.
Exactly. I was, I think, 5 years old or 6. My dad brought one home, and it was just like, whoa, what is this thing? So yeah, it was a great time to be alive. Now, when it comes to fragrance profiles, we talk a little bit about the fougères and stuff. What did you think was most predominantly in the women's side? Like, how would you compare it to like the 70s? Did it change a lot for women's or no?
Well, in the 70s, I guess we mostly talked about greens. And I think if we could pick one thing out for the 80s, it was massive florals. Huge, huge florals and huge use of musks. And I think that's also part of the reason why, sadly, a lot of the really huge 80s perfumes are ones that are not in particularly good shape in their current formulations. We could do a whole other episode, I think, Max, on 80s perfumes that we think are in good shape now, as opposed to 80s perfumes that were amazing in the 80s, but maybe are not in such great shape now. So yes, huge use of rose materials, tuberose materials, massive use of musks, and I'll be talking about that in relation to at least one of the perfumes on my list.
All right, let's kick this off. Let's start, as the guest here, you're going to have the first pick. We're going to do this chronologically, guys, so in the order that they were released. And Darius, go ahead and enlighten us with your first pick. I'm very curious.
Last time, we didn't overlap with a single one. This time, I predict that we will have at least one in common, Max, if not more. And I've got two from 1981, but I'm going to go with this one from 1981 first. This is a bottle that's actually seen better days, but never mind. And I'm wondering if we're gonna I see your face there. So this is Kouros from 1981 from Yves Saint Laurent, composed by Pierre Bourdon, you know, the legendary Pierre Bourdon. I'm gonna spray it here. And Kouros, this is the EDT that I've got here. It's maybe about, I don't know, 10 years old, this bottle. And geez, has there ever been a more distinctive perfume? Seriously.
Amazing.
And the really fascinating thing about Kouros is that it somehow manages to smell incredibly scrubbed clean straight out of the shower, and at the same time, just like disgustingly filthy almost. The civet note that's in there, with a very, very, very strong fecal overtone is so prominent, and yet you also get these bitter herbs, sage, artemisia, all sorts of woods, really, really clean, sparkling citruses at the top. It's almost too much. You know, if I wear this now, it's very rare, and I will tend not to wear it if I'm leaving the house, because I think it's so 80s and it's so big and it's so part of that whole culture of starting to go to the gym and, you know, getting pumped up and everything, that it really does feel a little bit too much for today's context. But
that's the Arnold Schwarzenegger of fragrances. Now let me ask you this: you have an older bottle with the silver shoulders, right?
You know more about this kind of stuff than I do, Max. But I'm guessing that's
vintage. That's vintage.
It's can't be that vintage, can it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's vintage. It's vintage.
Okay.
That particular bottle was like that, I believe, until the early 2000s. I think 2003, if I'm not mistaken. And then they reformulated and they took away those silver shoulders. Now, funny thing is, you talked about, you know, how our family and people we looked up to when we were growing up were that kind of stuff. And I remember an uncle of mine used to douse himself in that fragrance, and we could smell him like a mile away. It's a hair-chested fougere. I love that fragrance, Darius. Funny enough, I did not keep it in this list because, and you're going to see why, I had to go with a couple different ones just because, you know, I talked about in the 70s because in 1978, a Zara Pour Homme was released, and that to me is the end-all be-all of fougères. But in the 80s, there was a fragrance that I purchased myself, which was actually my first fragrance purchase ever. So I had to keep it here, you know, because of that. But Kouros, I absolutely love. I have a lot of vintage bottles. And like you said, you know, it's got that urinal cake kind of a vibe. It's very animalistic. It's insane. It starts really pungent, but it tones down as it progresses and develops. It transitions. It gets soapier and cleaner as you get down to the heart and to the dry down. I love it. It's got a beautiful honey accord in there that's really uncanny that people don't talk about it, but it's something that I really pick up, and I really been, you know, more and more gravitating towards, you know, fragrances that have this honey facet. But great pick, absolutely great pick.
I'm curious to know what yours is going to be now. What's your number one?
So this is 1980, and the reason why I picked this fragrance is because right in the beginning of the 80s, and it's something that took me over a decade to find a bottle. And I remember this, you know, on the groups and on eBay, very expensive. Like, man, and I really want this fragrance. And I had a decant from a reviewer here on YouTube that no longer reviews. And he said, this is like the best fragrance he ever smelled. If you like fougères and chypres, you have to try this. It's like a fusion between the two. I was like, I got to do it. And I ended up paying like, I think $600 for this bottle. And this is it right here. Patou pour Homme.
Ooh, pour Homme, right, yes.
The 1980 Patou pour Homme. Absolutely amazing fragrance. Like I said, it has, this is the cap, which has the insignia there. And this has a little bit of a fougère, and it also has a skeleton that is very chypre-esque. But it's just, I mean, I'm going to waste a spray here because I got to smell this. It's just amazing.
But this is not the perfume that you were saying was your first ever purchase.
No. That's coming up. That's coming up next.
Okay.
Oh my God, it smells heavenly. It smells absolutely heavenly. I mean, you have patchouli, you have vetiver, you have, I think, civet. There's definitely a chypre opening here that's very bubbly and sparkly. But when it starts to dry down, it definitely becomes earthier and greener with the fougère elements like the oak moss and the lavender. But it has like a peppery thing here. It has like a pimento boozy thing going on here, like a cognac pimento facet that's just so incredibly singular to this fragrance. I absolutely love this. This is a masterpiece. To me, it's one of those fragrances that if somebody said, hey, I want your whole collection, you can only keep one, it would be a hard toss between this one and Dolce & Gabbana pour Homme, you know, which will definitely be featured in the 90s. This is incredible. This is just absolutely breathtaking. There's nothing else to say.
I haven't smelt it for the longest time, so I couldn't even. But yes, I mean it is an absolute classic. I'm not even sure if it's still. Well, no, it's not still available because even the brand doesn't exist anymore officially, does it? But yeah,
it was reformulated. It was bought out by a different company as a conglomerate, and now they re-released it in different bottles, and it's just, you know, very, very toned down.
No,
you can find it. The bottle is different, and it's nothing like what this used to be. I forgot the perfumer, something Carlio. But he hasn't really done much. But
it could have been Jean Carlio.
Jean Carlio, that's it. Yeah. This is amazing. And this has something that is, even though it's, you know, in the 1980s, there's something in here that you can wear this today and still smell amazing. It's just like one of those things. I can't explain. There's something in here as it develops. I don't know if it's that pimento cognac vibe that you get here that's very modern-like, you know. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Wow.
When I meet you, finally, when we meet in person, I'm going to be wearing this.
Okay. I'll hold you to that.
What is your second pick?
My second one is also from 1981, same as Kouros, from a huge brand. But this also happens to be one of my personal all-time favorites. So if people ask me like for what some of my favorite perfumes are, I usually say that I can't give an all-time favorite, but I can give a top three. And this tends to be in my top three. This isn't even the original cap for it because I lost the cap and had to kind of replace it. But it's Chanel's Antaeus. I absolutely love Antaeus. And weirdly, I went through a long period of not having anything to do with it, of kind of thinking that I didn't like it. I think I had to grow into it. I very much remember Antaeus being around in the 80s when I was growing up in the Middle East. And I think at the time, I found it too overwhelming, just too strange a combination of kind of hard-hitting woods, but also powderiness with that beeswax note that comes through. You know, you're talking about honey notes in Kouros. But it's just... I think what I liked about so many of the emasculins in the 80s is that they seemed to have lots of different and interesting things to say about masculinity. So Kouros has got this, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger hardness to it, but it's got a softness. And Antaeus very definitely is quite an aggressive leather in many ways, but it's got this tender, powdery, gentle, balsamic, resinous base. And it's just genius. It is absolutely just one of the most perfect leathers, I think.
Would you say that is more of a chypre? Because people like to say it's a leather, but people like to say it's more of a chypre or less than a fougere. But it's a big debate. But I guess a leather is a good way. So it's like a woody Oriental.
I would go. I mean, I would go with a leather. I mean, I funnily enough, even though I get quite geeky about a lot of things, I tend not to get geeky about perfume classification. It's dry woods leather. I think this one has got to be. Although yes, you're right. It's got elements of an Oriental in it as well.
I like
transcends classification.
100%. And I like to say, you know, in the community, we like to call Interlude Man the Blue Beast. I like to always call Entheus the OG, the original Blue Beast. That thing was incredible. Entheus, which is another one that I almost put it on this list, but again, it stayed out because of these next two. Because Kouros and Entheus did not make it. We could have overlapped those two because of these next two.
Okay.
And you're gonna see why. So this next one here, Darish, was my first ever fragrance purchase. I remember going into the store, and this is like the early 90s. You know, I'm going into high school, you know, mid 90s really, you know, 93, 94. And I don't know at that point if this was close to being discontinued because it was released in 1981. But I remember the assay spraying it on the paper, on the blotter. And at that point, you had a lot of aquatics. You had a lot of, because we're talking the 90s here, and none of which I really wanted. And when I smelled this, it just blew my mind. I mean, I started to, you know, remember, you know, my uncles, my father, what they would wear, and it just spoke lengths to my taste.
So did you say 1981?
It was originally released in 1981. I picked this up in 93, 94.
I'm trying to think whether DRAKKAR Noir was 1981. I don't know what you're going to come up with now. Let's see. What is it? Ah, okay. Gosh, yeah.
Very interesting because when you think about, you know, Calvin Klein, you go back into the vintage stuff, most people talk about, you know, the usual suspects, right? CK1, CKB. But this is just unbelievable. Again, it has this really bright opening, but not so bright. But it's brighter than, let's say, Patou or Homme. It has, you know, because Calvin Klein is very well known for these very fruity, you know, and kind of like citrus elements. So you do get that here. But then it quickly goes into the fougere, the dark, the woods, the green, the oak moss. And one thing I love about this, it has like a cognac vibe to it, which very, very unique, especially when you're talking about something that was made in 1981. Amazing. I mean, it's a fougere at heart, but it has really unique components for a fragrance that was released in 1981. And because it was my first purchase ever, I had to include it here. I just had to. And again, it bumped easily Kouros and it bumped Entheus because it's in the same genre. I mean, it took notes because, again, it was released in the same year as Entheus. And the bottle is blue as well. So you can tell there's a lot of similarities here between the two. But there's something that this does that, again, it has a certain quality about it. And I think it's because it's my memory, because I remember wearing it so much, and it was like my signature scent in high school for the first half of my high school years. It just has a special place. It had to be here. Have you ever tried it?
Not for the longest time. Again, not for the longest time. Although if we managed to have a few minutes to talk about honorable mentions at the end, this was a great decade for Calvin Klein. You know, it was a decade when you could take it very, very seriously as a perfume house.
We're going to have to talk about honorable mentions because there was another one from Calvin Klein that did not make this list, and it was very hard for me not to put it on here. But
yeah, and I could have put in at least two, but I didn't for various reasons. So yeah, we should try and talk about it. But no, that's a great choice.
All right, let's keep it going. We're trying to make it a little snappier this time around, guys, because again, we want to talk about the honorable mentions this time.
Because in the 80s, time was money, right? So we have to just kind of keep it going. Okay, my third one is again from a venerable perfume house. So, you know, we've got Chanel, we've got YSL. This is, I adore this perfume. I adore this perfume because I think it's a genius perfume, but also it has a very, very important place in my heart and, you know, sort of family memories. And this is a proper vintage bottle that I managed to pick up. This is Dior's Poison. So we were talking about, you know, which feminines would be on there. This is the Esprit de Parfum version. So this is when Dior had quite a few of their scents in this concentration that was between an eau de toilette and a pure perfume. And this isn't even a natural spray in the sense that it's got some kind of a propellant, you know, so you have to be careful with, because it really comes out like crazy. Poison is the scent. It's from 1985. It's credited now to Edouard Flechier and to Jean Guichard. It's the perfume that a lot of people now love to hate. It's kind of become fashionable to you know, raise your eyebrows and say, oh my God, Poison, I used to hate smelling it on people. But it's just so beautiful. Sadly, not a scent that I think is in such amazing shape now. If people want to try it in its full glory, I would say it's worth trying to source a vintage bottle somewhere from some online seller. But oh, I just find this, I've always found it so heartbreaking, this perfume, and so beautiful, because yes, it has got a very, very strong witchy side. You know, Poison was a fantastic name for it because it's kind of, it is enchanting. It's got this kind of crone-like carnivorous quality to it as well. So it's not just a tuberose, but it's almost like a Venus flytrap that's coming to get you. But when you smell it now after all these years, you also marvel at how beautifully blended it is, how smooth it is, how that sort of roasted apple berry note at the top goes into a very, very multifaceted floral, where the tuberose may be the most prominent aspect, but by no means is it the only floral in there. And again, like a gorgeous sort of beeswaxy sandalwood base, it's just stunning. It is so stunning. And it is, you know, it's the perfect evil queen in Snow White perfume. You know how Angelina Jolie was like the perfect person to play Maleficent? Because she is just so stunning, and yet so stunningly evil as well. This is it. This is that perfume.
And this is where we overlap, because
I had not expected that. Wow.
This is where we overlap. This is a vintage bottle, by the way.
Wow.
This fragrance was released in 1985. And the funny thing is, there is plum in the note breakdown. And if you look at the bottle, it kind of looks like a plum. And even the color, it's like a purple plum kind of a color. And I agree with you 1,000,000%, Darius. I mean, you said it right. You think about a Venus flying trap. I mean, this thing is poisonous. It's fruity. It's coniferous. It's spicy. I mean, it hits you from all different angles, but it's such a masterpiece. Never in my life have I smelled anything like this. I remember first smelling this in my mother, and I was like, what is this thing? And years later, you know, like 2 decades later, I was able to source this vintage bottle, which I absolutely cherish and wear it very, very, very slow. And it's actually, it's a crystal dabber, and I just dab it sometimes just to go through that journey, that experience, that this is a journey of a fragrance. And, you know, it's one of those things you can criticize all you want, but this is one of those groundbreaking trendsetter moments in the world of perfumery. It's just absolutely stunning. And this is where we overlap.
In fact, I was not expecting us to overlap on that one. So that's great that we have overlapped on Poison. I just think it's just fantastic.
It's just amazing.
So was that your number 3?
That was my number 3. Oh, actually, that was 85. So that should have been my last one. But because we overlapped, I wanted to talk about it now.
That's cool.
You can go again.
No. You should do your.
I should do my 4th. Okay.
I guess I don't know. Now I've lost track. You say.
Okay, I'll go. So this is another one that a lot of men in my family wore as their signature scent, and I remember very vividly because it's one of those hair-chested fragrances. One of those. It was just very popular. People used to wear it going out clubbing. They used to wear it like it was like one size fits all. You know, you want to smell great, you want to smell masculine, manly, you would pull this fragrance off. And it's pretty much a one pony, you know, one trick pony, one pony show that this company had. They didn't have anything else to offer, which was funny. I'm talking about Guy Laroche from 1982, DRAKKAR Noir.
I had a feeling that would be on there.
I mean, this is amazing. I mean, it's one of those, I mean, it has a minty herbal opening, which is quite nice. I mean, I love the opening. I mean, the mint is just amazing. I love mint in my fragrances. It's one of those, you know, feel good, uplift you. It has a little sweetness to it as well. There's some floral components, and of course, the lavender and the oak moss fougere, you know, structure. But it's different. It's like I always tell people, you know, you look at a sheep or you look at a fougere, even though you have the main structure, the main skeleton, there's variations thereof. You have a more floral fougere, you have a more woodsy fougere, and you could definitely pick this up as you smell them side by side. With this one, I get that beautiful herbal minty up top, and then as it dries down, it gets soapy and a little bit nutty as well. I don't know if there's like nutmeg with some carnation. There's something here in the heart that becomes very nutty. Very sensual, very sensual. I love this stuff. I mean, I think it's still, when we talk about fragrances that are still decent, because you talked about some that have suffered tremendous reformulations, absolutely horrible today, this is actually pretty good still today. My bottle is from the early 2000s. I think it's from 2003, and it still smells incredible. And it's one of those that you can still find it because no one's really blowing down the doors to get this stuff. So unless they're diehard fans like ourselves, you know. But I have a few. I have a few because I remember smelling this at a store and they had a few older bottles and I picked up, I think, 4 or 5. Absolutely amazing. I love it. It reminds me of my childhood. I mean, a lot of my uncles would wear this as their signature scents, and I love to have this. Just a like, you know, a time capsule, if you will. Do you like this?
It's totally, absolutely such a striking scent of the 80s. I wore it a lot. I wore it a lot as a teenager. Again, for the geeks out there, it's very, very notable, that perfume, for its use of dihydromercenol, which was this aroma chemical that we now associate with those types of masculines. Guy Laroche, just as a sort of side thing, actually, they had a few interesting perfumes. So some people may take your exception to their description of them as a one-trick pony, but never mind, put that to one side. But no, DRAKKAR Noir is, yeah, it was so successful and so distinctive, and I think of those types of perfumes, it's still one of the best examples. Okay, my 4th one is me sticking with 1985, so same year as Poison. Interesting how these two very different florals came out in the same year, even though they're both comparable in terms of their size, in terms of their hugeness, if I can make up a word. This is by somebody who I featured in my 70s video with you as well. The brand is Estee Lauder, and it's the same perfumer who made white linen for Estee Lauder in the 70s. It's Sophia Groisman, and it's beautiful. I really think beautiful deserves its name. One of the most perfect floral bouquets. I think it's just wonderful and fitting that for the longest time now, Estee Lauder have used wedding imagery, haven't they, to advertise it? It's always a bride, it's always a wedding, it's always a marriage, and it's just this most holographic bouquet of all of the different flowers that you can possibly imagine, with maybe an emphasis on things like honeysuckle and a kind of lipsticky, violety rose, which I guess ties in with these ideas of romance, and that familiar, well-used, huge block of Sophia Groisman musks in the base. Very much of its time, but still absolutely gorgeous, and one of the best American perfume releases of all time, I think.
That's a great pick, and a funny thing, because my mom wore that fragrance, Beautiful, for the first half of the 80s. I remember, well, 85, I think maybe until like 88, and then she started wearing different things, but for like 3-year period, that was the only thing she ever wore. And I remember she absolutely loved it. She wore a lot of it, and you could smell in her clothes. You can smell as she passed. It's a great scent, you know, great pick. I'm going to stick with 1985 here, like you. Ooh. And because I'm a huge fan of Vetiver, I had to figure something out that really spoke lengths to me. And I know nowadays, a lot of people, you know, love to talk about, you know, Tom Ford Grey Vetiver as being this incredible Vetiver fragrance. And to be honest, Grey Vetiver is good, but it's a really watered down Vetiver. If you want something very, you know, realistic Vetiver that's going to get all the different facets of Vetiver, this would be it. From 1985, This will give you the fruity vetiver nuance, the earthy vetiver nuance, the smoky vetiver nuance. You know, it's got a little bit of everything as it transitions. To me, it's a perfect vetiver scent. One that I don't really talk about much because it's been discontinued and I only have one bottle. But if I had to talk about one vetiver end all be all, it would be this. And like oak moss, vetiver happens to be my favorite note in perfumery. I'm talking about Annick Goutal's vetiver from 1985. Absolutely stunning vetiver composition.
You've surprised me with that one.
Did I really?
Yeah, completely.
And here's the bottle. Absolutely stunning fragrance, guys. Now, Annick Goutal is a brand that to me is very under the radar. And I go as far as there's three brands that I don't talk about, but I don't talk about much on my channel because I feel, number one, they have been heavily reformulated, and number two, it's just hard to find these perfect formulations that they once had, which is Serge Lutens, Annick Goutal, and L'Artisan Parfumé. I think those three brands are absolutely stunning brands. And this, to me, is an absolutely work of art. I mean, if you love vetiver and you can find a bottle of this, get it because it's going to be worth your money. Like, it's worth every single penny. Oh, my God, I feel like drinking it. It's so good. It opens up almost boozy, you know. You get this fruity vetiver nuance. It's almost like a drink, like a beverage, like absinthe. And then as it progresses, you get the smoky facets, a little bit incense-y, a little bit earthy, a little bit floral. It's just, it smells like $1,000,000. I have never tried a vetiver fragrance. It's almost like you're taking the root and the grass of the vetiver and you're squeezing in your hands and you're smelling it. It's amazing. It's a trip. It's a journey.
Wow.
Absolutely fantastic. Have you ever tried this?
Not the Goutal vetiver, not for ages and ages and ages. I was not expecting you to come out with a Goutal. So this is fantastic that my last one is the one that I was like pretty certain we'd overlap on, but obviously that's not it now because you've told me that you're old, because that's it now. You've done your 5, right?
Yeah.
I would never expected us to overlap on Poison. But no, and that must be one of the original Goutals in the sense of actually having been made by Annick Goutal before she
100%.
before she passed away and her daughter took over.
The original fragrances made by Annick Goutal mother, to me, were one of the best fragrances ever made. I mean, if you go back in her portfolio and look at some of the stuff that I, thank God, have, I don't talk about, again, she has passed. You can't never replicate what she used to make. But she was an incredible perfumer, you know, just very underrated because no one ever really talks about her.
No, amazing. Fantastic.
I'm curious to see your last pick.
Well, I just thought this was a definite from you, but so I'm pleased that I'm able to do it because this is something that I wore to death. I think it's a, you know, genius piece of work. I allowed myself.
Is it Fahrenheit? Is it Fahrenheit?
Even though it's from, you know, it's from Dior and we've had one from Dior. This is from 1988 and my sort of oldish bottle is just a mini, but it's in good condition. So this one we need to credit to Jean-Louis Sieuzac, and also nowadays we say that Michel Almarac had a lot to do with it as well. We talked about grey flannel and how we didn't mention grey flannel for the 70s video. This is very much a kind of 80s update of grey flannel, 1988, I think I said. And this one is, hang on, because I never remember whether it's a twist or a pull. I'm going to put a little bit on skin. This was from the moment it came out. Now, at the time, my mum was working actually for Dior in the 80s in the Middle East, and so she went for the Fahrenheit launch, which meant that her teenage son had every single Fahrenheit product that you could imagine, you know, including the aftershave balm. I don't think I was even shaving then, but you know, I had the aftershave balm. I had the deodorant. I had the soap. You know, it came in a fantastic soap, and it really is sad that current Fahrenheit is not this, because this is the most striking, the most unusual combination of herbs and gasoline and cars going past you. You know, in a funny kind of way, the closest I have come to this in recent years, in terms of the concept, is a perfume actually from Lush called Curbside Violet. because it's got the violet leaf, but it's also got the kind of petrol fumes and car exhaust fumes, and which is what makes Fahrenheit so amazing, because it hisses, and yet it's also extremely sophisticated and very, you know, it was a genius color for this bottle as well, because it really is the
fire. It's fire.
Yes, it's fire, but it's charred, and it's kind of black going into passionate red, and it's just fantastic. So at least I'm glad I've stuck it in there, because I was sure you would.
It was very tough not to, only because I think DRAKKAR and Calvin, because with Calvin I was either going to leave either Kouros or Entheas, and with DRAKKAR that took the spot of Fahrenheit, just because, again, a lot of men, you know, uncles and family members wore that. But Fahrenheit came out in '88, and when it came out, like you said, it was just one of those things that was a head-turning, bold fragrance that nothing ever in the world had smelled like that. Like we talked about, all these fragrances like variations of fougères, but when that came out, it was its own thing. It's almost like its own new, you know, facet of a pyramid, or of a, what's the word I'm looking for, of a, you know, structural classification. Yeah. It was its own classification.
Well, it's a green leather. You could say it's a green leather.
Green leather. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I love it. Funny enough, my mom wore that fragrance. My father didn't like it so much. He thought it was too crazy, but my mother actually liked it. And that's how I discovered it in the late 80s. I think 89 is when I discovered it, and I loved it. And, you know, every time I would wear it as a kid, as a teenager, young adult, you know, no one could believe what the hell I was wearing, because it was so, like, you know, head turning, like, what is this? You know, like that petrol vibe, that gasoline vibe was just so uncanny and particular to that fragrance. Absolutely marvelous. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the honorable mentions, and I'll go through mine real quickly here. Like, these are the ones that didn't make the list, but it was hard for me not to put it on the list, and then you can tell about yours. Fahrenheit was definitely one of them. Oscar de la Renta Pour Louis was definitely another one, 1980. I love that fragrance. So sad that I couldn't keep it here. At the tail end of the decade, we had Homme, you know, the purple pink juice, which is, you know, that vanilla floral, very weird. Talk about weird. You know, Fahrenheit was weird. That was even weirder. You know, something that almost made the list. Davidoff, Zeno, and Cool Water. Zeno was an amazing Oriental woody spicy from '86, and you know, Cool Water is '88, which Pierre Bourdon was the nose. Many people talk about Green Irish Tweed in '85, and he took that formula and he did Cool Water. It's a big, you know, debate about that. CK Obsession, 1986, incredible Oriental. I didn't like it at first. I learned to like it as the years, you know, went by. Giorgio Beverly Hills, 1984, incredible. Giorgio Armani Pour Homme, 1984. Of course, Kouros, 1981. Antonio Puig Corum, 1981, amazing as well. Dior Jules from 1980. And these are just to name a few. I mean, the list goes on and on. Like we talked about, the 80s were just an incredible, you know, decade for masculine powerhouses, and it was very hard to put these five together. Now, let me know some of your great honorable mentions that you had a hard time not including.
I used to wear Corum as a teenager. I'm sure I've still got a mini of Corum somewhere. No, I've got my list in front of me as well, and there were so many. I mean, I agree with a lot of the ones that you mentioned. Yves Saint Laurent's Paris from 1983, also by Sophia Groisman. As I say, it was a great decade for Calvin Klein. I always had a real soft spot for the two Eternities. Eternity for Women from 1988 was just, together with Poison, was completely the smell of my world growing up in the Middle East. Because if you went out into the shopping malls, the shopping centers, the kind of smell that seemed to be in the air from the women walking past you was that they were either wearing Poison or they were wearing Eternity. And I also wore Eternity Man for years. I absolutely loved that. Estee Lauder's Knowing. Clarence's Eau Dynamisante doesn't get enough mentions. That's a beautiful citrus chypre. Calyx, you know, which used to be from Prescriptives, you know, by Sophia Groisman. And to give a shout out to what was legitimately a niche brand like you did with Goutal, I think it's also worth mentioning New York from Nicolai. Which is a kind of 1980s version of Guerlain's Abbey Rouge. But it was difficult. It was difficult, and I think it's going to get even more difficult because we would have become so much more aware of everything that was being released in the 90s and beyond.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait. The 90s were a time where I started to really wear fragrances heavily. So like you said, I think it's going to be even harder because we became even more aware. You know, I think in the 80s, I maybe had 1 or 2 fragrances, but in the 90s, I started to like build a collection. So that's pretty tough. I look forward to it. I can't wait to see the picks. And guys, you know, thank you so much for tuning in, for being a part of this journey with us, this time capsule, if you will. You know, coming up will be the 90s in about, you know, a couple weeks time, but we're going to continue to pump these out for you guys. And please, if you haven't yet subscribed to me or Darius Persolaise, please do. He does lives, which are very engaging, lots of fun. You can ask questions, and, you know, he's part of the community. So anyone that's watching this and wants to be, you know, mentioned and be a part of this community, you're more than welcome, because that's why we're here, to share this passion and love that we have for fragrances. Persolaise, thanks for being here again. It was great fun as always.
A huge, huge, huge thank you to you and to everybody watching. Thanks, Max.
Pleasure. See you soon, guys. Keep tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the 1990s.